I get to introduce a good friend, Tom Dixon, who really is like our Mr. Pecha-Kucha. Tom is an angler, a hunter, an amateur chef, and a conservation journalist who grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. For the past 14 years, he has lived in Helena, where he is the editor of Montana Outdoors, the magazine of Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. He's been on every single Pecha-Kucha committee, and tonight he said, you know, it's almost easier for me to do one than to find somebody, so please welcome the Lost Art of Hitchhiking, Tom Terrific Dixon.
How many people have ever hitchhiked in the audience? Can you raise your hand? Great. And how many people have ever picked up a hitchhiker? Okay, good, thank you. What I'm going to talk about tonight is why people hitchhike, what it's like to hitchhike, and why, sadly, almost no one does it anymore. People hitchhike for two reasons. The first is economic. A student or some other person is trying to get somewhere and doesn't own a car or have bus fare, so they walk out to a road and where other people are driving by and basically ask if one of those drivers will stop and give them a lift. People have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years, basically for as long as there have been modes of transportation and people needing a lift. But the actual term hitchhiking and the use of the thumb to signal hitchhiking is relatively recent. It began in the 1920s and 30s. That's when cars started replacing other forms of transportation. And when you had cars, you had people wanting rides in cars. At first, people just used their thumb to indicate the direction they were going. Hey, buddy, I'm going this way. Before long, the thumb sticking straight up became a symbol for, I'm looking for a ride. The other reason people hitchhike is for the adventure. For instance, this is me in 1987 outside Johannesburg, South Africa. I was standing there on the roadside without knowing what would happen next. All I knew is where I wanted to go, to Zimbabwe, but I had no idea how long it would take or who would pick me up along the way. And that's what makes hitchhiking so adventurous. You're inviting the unknown and relinquishing control. You're basically saying, okay, fate, I'm in your hands now. Let's jump off this board and see what happens. And you know what? Mostly what happens is something interesting. During the 40-plus years I've been hitchhiking, I've been picked up by rabbis, ranchers, college professors, farmers, truckers, and even off-duty police officers. I've ridden in Mercedes, BMWs, 18-wheelers, VW Beetles, and once in Wales, I rode in the back of a pickup truck with 4 goats and a dog. Once I rode in the back of a flatbed truck for 11 hours through Botswana's Kalahari Desert. Another time I got picked up by a one-armed cowboy named Earl in Wyoming during a snowstorm. When the state closed the freeway, and I ended up spending the night with him in a hotel room. And then there was the time I got picked up by a young, newly married couple in Eugene, Oregon. They asked me to drive, then climbed into the back seat and proceeded to, as we used to say in the 70s, get it on. For half an hour, all I could see in the rearview mirror were their naked legs thrashing in the air. Now, I know that most people think hitchhiking or picking up hitchhikers is dangerous, but it turns out not to be the case. Robberies and attacks on and by hitchhikers are rare. One study in California found that a person is far more likely to get killed playing golf than they are hitchhiking or picking up hitchhikers. Still, I realize that this is what you envision when you've ever considered picking up a hitchhiker. Now, I just wrote this for this presentation, but I know that this is what most people believe, even though studies show that hitching and picking up hitchhikers is relatively safe. Of course, there's some basic safety rules in hitchhiking. One is to always look the driver over before getting into the vehicle, and then refuse a ride if he looks dodgy. And if you're a woman, I definitely advise hitchhiking with a companion, because that way you won't have to deal with creeps like this guy. So even though there are some risks, there was a time not long ago when students and soldiers on leave and other people regularly hitchhiked in cities and along highways. It was commonplace in the 1960s, 70s, and even the 80s. So why doesn't anyone do it anymore? One explanation is that vehicles are far more reliable today than they were back then. It used to be that cars broke down all the time. In college, I drove a Chevy Vega that wouldn't get me across town without breaking down, much less across the country. So for many of us, hitchhiking was a necessity if you wanted to see America. The second reason is that young people seem far less interested in seeing America. People were once inspired by Jack Kerouac's On the Road and Woody Guthrie's As I Went Walking That Ribbon of Highway. For whatever reason, striking out on the open road with a cardboard sign and a backpack just isn't as popular as it used to be. But I think the main reason so few people hitchhike nowadays is that we live in a less trusting and less sympathetic time. And that's due largely to 24-hour TV news that sensationalizes violent crime. America is far safer today than it was 2 decades ago. Yet people have been misled into thinking that the world is dangerous. As a result, people are afraid to both hitchhike and to pick up hitchhikers. And that's a shame, because hitchhiking is ecological, it's communal, and it's a reminder that we're all in this world together, just trying to get from one place to another as best we can. Thankfully, there are still some intrepid souls out there still willing to thumb a ride. Like this young couple from Vermont I picked up last summer on their way to Glacier. They told me they'd had good luck getting rides from friendly people throughout their entire trip. Those two give me hope for the future, hope even for America itself. Because ultimately, hitchhiking is about faith. Faith that you won't be stranded in the middle of nowhere, faith that you'll eventually get to your destination, and most of all, faith in the goodwill of your fellow human beings, even if, at first glance, they look a little rough around the edges. So the next time you see a hitchhiker, and a few of us are still out there, think of that guy as a symbol for hope and for optimism. And even if you decide not to pick him up, consider at least giving that poor soul your own thumbs up to let him know that, hey buddy, hang in there. Everything's going to be okay.